What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. Let's forget about the fact that I look like I'm about ready to rob a house, and let's talk about growing zones. One of the biggest issues I have with the term growing zone is that most people don't know how to properly use it. In a recent study done in 2018, the Master Gardeners Association took a survey, and 8 out of every 10 respondents did not know how to properly use the term growing zone to apply to their garden. 8 out of every 10. That means 80% of gardeners are misusing the term growing zone, and that can have huge effects on your garden. Let me explain why. So when you're looking at the term growing zone, a growing zone is typically assigned to a plant that is meant for a specific hardiness zone. Here in the United States, we have zones 2 all the way down to zones 13. So you have a pretty wide range of zones, and each one of those zones is typically indicated with a color or a number, depending on which chart you're looking at. And so zones 2 would be like the furthest north, and zones 13 would be the furthest south. However, it's not quite a gradient as in north to south. What if you look at the Pacific Northwest? Well, the Pacific Northwest, things like Washington, are actually zones 6 to 7 in certain areas. Michigan is zone 5, 4, and even 6. So despite the fact that Washington is much further north than Michigan is, you actually have an issue because the warm ocean breeze coming off of the water is actually keeping the land much warmer, and it acts as a microclimate, or I guess kind of a macroclimate, if you will, compared to Michigan, which is more inland and does not get the warm air off the ocean. We don't get that, and therefore our air is much colder. Our average temperature is much colder in winter than it is in some place like Washington, which is much further north. So you cannot apply a gradient of north to south and just assume that it's going to be accurate. And also, most things in the garden don't even use growing zones, believe it or not. Let me explain that. All right, so with these apple trees here, these apple trees are perennial. They are going to be a deciduous fruit tree. Deciduous means that they drop their leaves, but then come out of dormancy in the spring and regrow them. This means that these need to survive winter. They are expected to come back year after year, because I would hope so, because fruit trees can take 4 to 5 years to mature. So if they died in a first year, what's the point of growing them? So the point of growing a perennial is knowing that it's going to be able to survive. Well, what does survival really have to do with perennials? Well, it has to do with their hardiness zone. How much cold temperatures can these take before they do not come out of dormancy? What is the coldest temperature that these can take for a sustained period of time before they die? Now take that information and compare it to things like tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, anything like that that grows during the main growing season, and you expect it to die at the end of the growing season. How are those any different from apple trees? Well, the fact of the matter is they don't have growing zones. The reason why they don't have growing zones is because they don't survive winter. The only thing that a growing zone really means is it indicates the average coldest temperature that you're going to experience during winter. It has nothing to do with the average last frost date. It has nothing to do with your average first frost date. It has nothing to do with when you should be starting seeds. It has nothing to do with which tomatoes grow best, which cucumbers grow best. I get so many people that ask me, Luke, what's the best tomato to grow in 5A? Or what's the best cucumber to grow in 7A or 7B? And I said, it doesn't matter. You could be in zone 2. It does not matter, because the tomato is going to grow based on its growing season, right? Not its average coldest temperature. So because of the fact that you live in zone 2, you can grow a tomato that someone's growing in zone 7. You just have to simply start it indoors earlier if you want to grow that thing, right? So if it's lettuce and it takes 45 days to mature, that's its maturity period, right? If you have enough days in your growing season to grow that crop, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, right? And if you don't have enough days to get it to mature, say you want to grow something like a tomato that takes 110 days to mature, and you only have 90 days in your growing season. Well, first off, it's a fairly short growing season. There are people that have that short of a growing season, but what do? Well, you just start it inside 30 to 40 days sooner, and yeah, it's not going to be the most ideal thing in the world, but it's never going to survive winter anyways. So assigning a growing zone to that is simply not necessary. A lot of people say, well, yeah, but there might be certain varieties that are more cold hardy, right? Well, you could have the cold hardiest tomato, but at the end of the day, no matter how cold hardy it is, it's not going to survive winter. So therefore, it still does not matter what growing zone you apply to it because it's still irrelevant. Now, you do have people that say, yeah, well, a shorter growing season is going to have typically colder weather. And I would say, well, kind of. What if your elevation plays into effect, right? You might be in zone 5, but you're, 100 feet higher in elevation. Well, if you're 100 feet higher in elevation, you're going to have a frost far sooner than someone down, 100 feet closer to sea level. And that's because the elevation changes, you get frost the higher you go, right? And so if you live up on a mountain, your neighbors might be 500 feet down the mountain. That's a huge difference in elevation change, and that really can play a big role into the overall kind of microclimate of how fast you get a frost or how short your growing season is or things like that. And so that has nothing to do with the growing zone either. You simply cannot apply it as a blanket statement. And furthermore, as I've said before, if you live in Michigan and you compare our growing season to someone far further north, like in Washington or Oregon, those people living in the Pacific Northwest have actually a longer growing season than we have here in Michigan. And yes, their growing zone is a higher number, meaning their average coldest temperature is warmer than ours. That still has no bearing on their growing season because I know many people over there that cannot grow things like tomatoes or peppers or zucchinis because they get blight ridden and they have a specific time that they can grow their crops. But just because they have, more growable days does not mean their climate necessarily will allow them to grow that certain crop, right? So their growing season for things like squash might be 80 days, despite the fact they have like 140 days in their growing season. That's because 30 of those days are too wet to be able to grow a squash crop or a tomato crop because they might be blight ridden. Just because you live down south in Florida, right? Florida has super hot and super humid summers. Just because they have basically 365 days to grow a crop doesn't mean that crop can grow for 365 days. So now that you know what a growing zone is and what it means and how to apply it to your plants and which plants don't really need a growing zone at all, I would encourage you guys to go out and actually educate the gardening community, taking this video as kind of a launch pad to helping others get the right type of information they need, because growing zones can be really confusing and very discouraging. I think a lot of gardeners get hung up with plants to grow, or should I grow this or should I not grow this, and they end up really selling themselves short with the amount of biodiversity and beauty that they could be adding to their garden because they don't get the answers they're looking for from their fellow gardeners, because nobody really knows if you're going off of false information. Nobody really knows which tomato is going to grow best in zone 2 versus zone 5 versus zone 7. Nobody knows which cucumber is going to grow best in this, zone 3 or 4 or 7 or 8. Nobody knows because it's not even really based on real information. And so a lot of gardeners sell themselves short by not growing these amazing varieties because they fear, well, what if this variety does not grow in my zone? And so by helping educate your fellow gardeners, by going onto Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, going onto even Reddit and going onto these forums, right? Or even just your garden clubs. I see so many people spreading this information around and kind of just falsely spreading it around without even really knowing that it's false. They're not out there with malice. They're just kind of regurgitating the same thing that they've been told their whole life about gardening, and they're spreading it around to other gardeners as well. And what I would really like to do is to just put a halt to wherever this information is getting spread and simply have you guys be an outlet for the correct information so that we're actually helping gardeners. Because at the core of MIgardener, that's what our mission is to help gardeners have more fun gardening, help them garden easier, and to help you realize that gardening does not have to be as difficult as you think it has to be. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. If you have any questions or concerns about this topic, make sure to post them in the comments box below. I'll be answering comments for the next 30 minutes live, basically as this video is uploading. So as it's being processed, I'm going to be answering questions. I'm going to dedicate 30 minutes and then I'm going to be off doing other things for the day. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. I look forward to seeing you guys having a good discussion in the comments box down below. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. And I'm not robbing a house. All right.